sorry about this, rebut, let's say, or comment on one comment that Simon made, and he can rebut me at a later occasion if he chooses, which is I really very, very strongly disagree with your interpretation of Siegfried's narration, which I think actually is exactly the opposite of what you said, which is that I agree that all previous narrations in The Ring have indeed been given either in hate or in regret or in self-loathing, or to remind people of the grievances of the past, or in which they are to some extent slaves of the past. But Siegfried's narration, to anyone who listens to it, if we forget about interpretations for a while, existentialism, any other interpretations, but just listen to it, is incredibly nostalgic. It absolutely sends the sense of magic in the rediscovery of his own past. And the Siegfried is beginning a journey back to his better self, let's say, which of course is interrupted rather brutally by being murdered. So I think that the function of Siegfried's tale, although it is definitely one of the narrations in The Ring, it's really radically different from the other ones. So that's my, you can come back and rebut me later. So the first thing I'd like to talk about, the main thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to show 4 ways and give lots of examples of how Wagner relates the new world of Götterdämmerung, the new world of society, of deceit, of trickery, of a lot of really very negative things in most respects, to the world of the previous parts of The Ring, which is a more heroic world, although it has its share of deceit and certainly of tragedy. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk about the nature of deceit in Götterdämmerung and in its musical language. In The Ring, there is a fair amount of magic. We talked about, Simon talked about the magic, of course, of the potion, and which is certainly sort of a standard ploy of traditional drama. I actually think that the potion is very different here than it is in Siegfried, and is in Tristan, where, of course, the potion in Tristan is, on one level, utterly meaningless, but on the other level, quite meaningful symbolically, in that they think they're drinking their death potion. And so it very much strengthens and sort of adds an extra dimension to the link between their idea of love and their idea of death, and the longing for death or the longing for release, and all that entails. So it has a very, very strong symbolic value, although it's completely, they're already in love, they're just as much in love before they drink it as they are afterwards. So that's, and it loses their ambitions because they think they're going to die anyway. So, you know, and probably very quickly as well. Whereas in Götterdämmerung, it does have more of a sort of a stage ploy effect, although I think it's very important. But it is also a symbol, and I'll get to that in a second, a very important symbol of a much larger picture of Götterdämmerung and deceit, and specifically not just deceit, but also magic. We don't see really in The Ring, in the early parts of The Ring, a lot of magic. But can anybody think of some very specific magic we do see in the early Ring? Yes, the Tarnhelm, exactly. The Tarnhelm is the one really bit of magic. So the Tarnhelm motive, of course, is this. That's a very sort of spooky, but also you can't quite grab a hold of it. It feels like there's a name for that kind of harmonic movement in music. We call that a median relation because it moves to, median means the 3rd degree, and so it goes up 3 notes. But that's not important to know. It's good for identification purposes, but it has a certain kind of sound. And in the first 3 operas, this motive is used very sparingly, for obvious reasons, because it's used only when the Tarnhelm is actually either being used or being very specifically mentioned. For instance, it never appears in Die Walküre, because there's no reason for it to appear in Die Walküre. There are a few other motives which share this sort of harmonic characteristic with it, which we do hear in the other operas, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm not all that important for what I'm talking about now. Now, all of a sudden, in Act 1 of Götterdämmerung, this motive, this Tarnhelm, becomes not only important, but it basically takes over everything else. Now, if the motives are used in such a way as we say, here's the motive, and here's why we're using the motive. It becomes a big breakdown of the system. But as I said last night, in Götterdämmerung, there's a strong tendency of Wagner to use the motives in a much more metaphoric way. If the Tarnhelm becomes a symbol, not just of the thing itself, which is used in Act 1 of Götterdämmerung. So there is some connection. I mean, after all, the Tarnhelm is what Siegfried and Gunther use to trick Brunhilde, and Hagen is involved in it because Hagen reminds him, you have this Tarnhelm, you can use it. Although Siegfried knows about that too. He says you can travel fast with it, but Siegfried, that's right, Siegfried knows nothing about the Tarnhelm. Everything he learns about the Tarnhelm, Hagen tells him. So that is Hagen's definitely involvement. And it does play a major role in the betrayal and entrapment of Brunhilde by disguising Siegfried as Gunther and allowing the switch of the bride to take place. Since Siegfried is the only one, it sometimes confuses people, although perhaps it shouldn't if it were produced well. The reason that Siegfried has to disguise himself as Gunther is because only Siegfried can go through the fire to free Brunhilde. So the idea is he's going to go through the fire and free Brunhilde, and then go back through the fire with Brunhilde, and then she's going to be slipped to the real Gunther, and she's not going to notice the difference. And as far as Siegfried's concerned, the only problem that happens when Brunhilde starts saying, you're the one, is that he wasn't really completely disguised. As far as Gunther and Gudrun are concerned, it's not that he wasn't completely disguised, is that he actually went ahead and had sex with Brunhilde up on the mountain. So he betrayed Gunther up on top of the mountain. And of course, only Hagen knows. This is a very important plot aspect of Götterdämmerung, which it's worth repeating, that Hagen knows that Brunhilde was Siegfried's wife before. Gunther and Gudrun know that they have tricked Siegfried into forgetting any woman before and into getting Brunhilde as Gunther's wife. But they don't know about that Siegfried was with Brunhilde before. So when Brunhilde comes up and says, he's my husband, not him, they just think that Siegfried went ahead and took advantage of the occasion and made hay while the going was good, as it were, which would have been, of course, a horrible betrayal of his agreement with Gunther, with his blood brothership agreement. So Hagen is very much playing on bits of knowledge. And Siegfried himself, Siegfried absolutely does not have a guilty conscience towards anybody, except that he's trying to protect Gunther's, because Gunther, of course, is losing his reputation. Because this is all happening in front of the crowds. One of the reasons why the crowds become a very, very important to the course, a very important aspect in both Acts 2 and Act 3 of Götterdämmerung, because they serve as witnesses. Hagen uses them as witnesses. He has tremendous power over Gunther because he has the witness of the people. So he shows how first Gunther was betrayed, and then second, how Gunther has no right to the ring. And that's why all this has to take place in front of the people from Hagen's standpoint, because he uses them as his allies, as it were. And of course, Gunther is incredibly belittled. He's driven into the corner because, I mean, after all, what is the first thing that Gunther says? And the very, very first time, the scene we just heard at the beginning of the Gibbetschuk scene, the first words out of his mouth are, now Hagen, tell me how my reputation is on the Rhine. This is a man who is terribly worried about his reputation. And so, of course, if everybody finds out that he's too weak to get his own bride, that he got someone else to get him for him by using deceit and magic, I mean, that doesn't look good. So Hagen has everybody by their weak points, as it were. Siegfried's weak point being, I guess, his innocence and his sort of basic desire to please, and by his inability to think things through. I mean, he just acts, sort of, as it were, without thinking of the ramifications of his actions. Going back to the Tarnhelm. So we would hear this motive in one or two places when it's being used, makes perfectly good sense. As I said, when Hagen says what it is and tells Siegfried how to use it, just to play this place, he says it's the Tarnhelm, the Nibelung's most cunning work. Changes the rhythm a little bit. That's the whole motive. As we heard it, haven't heard all of that since Rheingold. And then, of course, we hear who actually made the Tarnhelm, which are the Nibelungs. But the Tarnhelm gets used tremendously in places that actually make no sense whatsoever in terms of the actual plot outline. For instance, it gets used a great deal in the scene between Waltraud and Brunhilde. I'm going to play one other verse. This is the Valhalla motive, right? It's a big field of associations, but it has. So here's the Valhalla motive in the one of the ways we hear it in the Waltraud narrative. We have that, which of course that's the Tarnhelm. There's something else in there too, which I'm going to talk about later in the talk. In other words, he's poisoned the Valhalla motive with the Tarnhelm. Now, the Tarnhelm has nothing to do with this scene, not directly. And indeed, actually, for instance, the very end of the act, which is always pretty horrible and always makes me feel like I've been kind of hit over the head by a sledgehammer, it really just takes over the music. I mean, the very, very end of the yum. I could play lots of examples, but I really need to. But so the Tarnhelm and a surrogate for the Tarnhelm, and that's going to be basically sort of the rest of my topic about this idea of surrogates, take over the action, becomes a musical metaphor for this world of magic and trickery, of deceit, of things not being as what they seem. And of course, that's Götterdämmerung is all about that. This world where things are not right, where deceit is the common currency, at least Hagen's currency. He deceives everyone. And the very word deceit is used tremendously often in Götterdämmerung. One of Brunhilde's most telling reproaches to Gunther, whom she really belittles, she says, deceiver, self-deceiver. You deceived yourself, in other words. Not only did you deceive me, but you deceived yourself, which of course he did. And then again, because Brunhilde doesn't know that Gunther doesn't know that she was Siegfried's wife before. All this, what people don't know, is a very big issue in Götterdämmerung. This sort of incomplete knowledge, which Hagen uses. The only one who knows all of it is Hagen. Who knows it all, I guess, because that's just the way it is. These are the kinds of questions that you really mustn't ask in mythological type works or works like The Ring. How does Hagen know? How does Mima know everything all the stuff he knows? I mean, have they been, in some productions actually, they're physically around watching, but I'm not sure that's necessarily helpful or necessary. But anyway, they know. He knows, from his father, presumably, the entire story. I'm just going to move. Okay, so how are the ways that Wagner creates the sense that Götterdämmerung is a new version and sort of a deceitful or deceit-filled or distorted version of the old world of The Ring? So I'm concentrating on 4 basic techniques he uses. The first is to take an old motif, an old leitmotif, and to have a new version of it in Götterdämmerung, which somehow is just different and gives us different sense of associations, although it's immediately recognizable as the old version. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is a completely new theme for something or some person that we've seen before. There's one very, very famous example of that. The other examples are a little bit less. I think I might concentrate on the first one. Okay, that's the second example. Then the third is taking old themes but giving them new meanings and completely new uses, so that we remember what it meant back then, but it seems to mean something quite different now. Okay, that's, And then the fourth, which is probably the most difficult, is Wagner's creation of parallels or proxies or surrogates, where because of parallel situations or other aspects, we hear on some level, or should hear on some level, themes as representatives, as it were, of old themes, that they are almost like a proxy of an old theme or a parallel to an old theme, and they take on their function in ways which tell us a lot about the way the world has changed. We can compare what this is now to what it was before. There are quite a lot of examples of that, and I'll concentrate on just a couple of them. So let's start with the first group, which is just a new version of an old theme, which still means basically the same but has been changed. There's a whole lot of these, but here's one. That's, of course, Siegfried's horn call. And all through Siegfried, it obviously is associated with, I think, Siegfried as the man of nature, Siegfried as sort of the outdoors free. Siegfried basically has 2 themes. He has lots of themes associated with him, but 2 very personal themes, which seems to stand more for sort of heroic and cosmic aspects of Siegfried, whereas the horn call seems much more Siegfried as the man of nature. Excuse me? The stud, a little bit. Yeah, sure. Okay, in Götterdämmerung, right away, at the beginning of the dawn interlude leading to the love duet, we hear this. Of course, it's just... And then which is actually when he first comes in, but it's also in the funeral march. And this, of course, is the horn call, which was this sort of lovely sort of call of nature thing, now has become very grand and heroic and brassy, and it in some ways could be seen as a growth of Siegfried, although it could perhaps also be seen more accurately as a rather diminution of Siegfried. I liked him better with the original horn call, but whatever our feelings about it is, it certainly shows a new phase of Siegfried. The Siegfried who comes out of that cave, whether they were there for one night, which I don't believe for a second, by the way, or for however long they were there, he's not the same Siegfried. I mean, that doesn't really make any difference. I mean, this is drama. This isn't. We're not making a historical chronicle here. This is a very different Siegfried, for better or for worse. There's a certain kind of very strong heroic feeling in this theme. Then there are a lot of other ones which sometimes are less immediately understandable, but still can be very, very telling. You know, we all know how the magic fire, the fire that it's a very specific version of sort of Loga's fire music that we heard right from the start from Rheingold when Loga first comes on, but it becomes very specified. You know, and when as the magic fire put around Brunhilde to protect her, and of course it has its great moment of glory in the scene when at the end of Valkyria, when Wotan puts Brunhilde to sleep and he sets the fire in front of her, and it's this very magic scene. And then of course we get a lot of it again when Siegfried goes through the fire to find Brunhilde and then to where they fall in love. And then of course it's little bits of it are referred to later. But in Götterdämmerung it takes on a rather different form, which is somewhat subtle. So when it's referred to afterwards, and then especially in particularly telling manner when Siegfried was remembering it in his narration, towards the end of his narration, because of course, what is the last thing in Siegfried's narration? It's when he remembers awakening Brunhilde. The last bit of things that he has forgotten. The only part that he has actually been forced to forget by drinking the potion, if we take that into account, which is probably not really very important to do so, except that the potion is the perfect image of the magical, delusionary trickery of the Tarnhelm, and I'll talk about how that works in a second. So we heard before, that's the original version. Here, when they're talking about it, and Siegfried is remembering, saying, you know, that he went through this fire. Now, he actually never tells them about going through the fire, specifically, but they're just talking about a woman surrounded by the fire. That's a very important distinction. Siegfried, of course, they don't know. If they had known that Siegfried right off the bat had blurted out that he'd gone through the fire to get Brunhilde, Hagen's whole plot would have kind of fallen on its face, but he never does. So instead of going in this kind of big circle, this one has it's sort of compressed, and it's become more urgent. Let me find. The other one actually is said before Siegfried gets on the scene. That's why I couldn't find it. It's before Siegfried gets on the scene, and Hagen is trying to is basically seducing a Gunther into getting involved in this whole plan. And he's saying, oh yes, there is a woman who would be the right bride for you. Remember, he says, the problem with you is you're not married. And Gunther says, well, do you know a wife that would be good for me? And he says, yes, I know a wife who would be perfect for you, who would give you the greatest glory and reputation of any guy on the Rhine. And he says, I know this woman. So it's okay. So it's can you hear the difference? The original verse, and now it's been really sort of compressed. And when we get to Siegfried's Tale, this becomes the end of Siegfried's Tale. This becomes really telling. Also, attached to it, even in these first examples that we've heard, is something which was obviously not attached to it in times of forest, because he goes. The forest bird. I mean, you could make a story out of this, say, well, the forest bird is who led Siegfried to the fire in the first place. But whatever, he's attached the forest bird to it. You could interpret that in a lot of ways. But in this new version of Götterdämmerung, the forest bird is attached to it. That little, you remember that's one of the calls we heard when Siegfried is lying in the forest dreaming about the birds, hearing the birds saying, and one of the sort of telling parts of the bird call is that little call of whatever bird that is supposed to be. So here is the passage. Siegfried is remembering. He's just taken the potion that's supposed to make him remember, and he's now remembering not the bird telling him and going through the fire and seeing Brunhilde. This is the motive of the magic potion. So I'm going to talk about that later. So just so you know, it starts. So he's drinking this new drink. Obviously, this fire thing, which is in itself a rather passive motive. I mean, it's magical and stuff, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Well, here it's really going. I mean, we're all panting along with it. It's become, as Siegfried has refound his memory. So there is a purpose. Wagner is really clever. By having this transformation, this new version of this motive, already planted back when the Gibbetschungs talk about it in Act 1, he's given us a background for it. So when Siegfried starts remembering his past, and it really comes to life and surges, we have this new version of the magic fire music, which now, of course, takes on this completely different feeling, full, of passion and movement and I would say also positive action. Another example of a theme which comes from the earlier ring, which is transformed in a new way in Götterdämmerung, specifically Götterdämmerung, is not just the theme, it's actually a very specific version of a theme. You know, we all know that in the ring, that two-note falling half step is associated with woe, with problems, with frustrations. It comes in millions and millions of ways. But there's a very specific way that we hear that's reinforced with a very specific association, which is and the reason we have a specific association is the first time we hear it, and then the second, third, and fourth times too, Alberich is kissing the ring in Rheingold, showing the power. In other words, we actually visually, only time we ever see the ring in action in the entire Ring des Nibelungen, in the entire cycle, is in Das Rheingold, when Alberich is using the ring to force the enslaved Nibelungs to do his will. And we always hear it too. So that particular version becomes associated with, I would say, the power of the ring. That's as good a name as any. Okay, in Götterdämmerung, instead, there's this new version which is just all over the place. There are millions and millions and millions of occurrences, but probably first heard in Hagen's Watch. And notice how it's complete. This one was... And then he kisses the ring, and it goes... There's the gong plays, and it's very, very melodramatic. Okay, well, here we have two. This is very complicated music. I don't want to get into all the details here. But in any case, there's something else which has just gotten... the form of the Tarnhelm has just come into this too, but I want to get into that. But because which makes sense, the Tarnhelm gets into everything in Acts 1 and 2 of Götterdämmerung. You can't look at 2 lines of music without its being there. And once you get into the actual act itself. But I mean, it just permeates the music because it's trickery, it's falseness. But anyway, this is certainly, or... We heard in the bit from Hagen's scene with Alberich. It's very, very... It's the same motive, but it's a very special Götterdämmerung form. I mean, to play it again. That's the form in the earlier part of the ring. That's a much sharper chord, a much more plangent and dissonant chord. It is a much more dissonant chord. It's also, as it happens, a chord more closely related to the harmonies of the ring motive itself, because if I play out the whole motive and just play the notes all together, that's what I get. And then I resolve it. So that's how it's derived. But it's the same. We hear it. It's just a new version of that, but it's a Götterdämmerung version of that. Okay, another Götterdämmerung version, which is actually pretty straightforward. You know, in Rheingold, when Fasolt and Fafner, the giants, first come on the scene, claiming their payment for the building Valhalla, we hear... big pom, 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 pom. Very, very heavy and stumping and descriptive, and which is a fourth, that interval in music. Then, when in Siegfried we first see Fafner, who's now transformed himself into a dragon, it's the same motive, but it's changed there. It's so instead of, now it's, which is troubling and unpleasant. There's that instead of a fourth, it's called a tritone now, which in the Middle Ages was called the interval of the devil, and for a lot of reasons. But the interval of the devil, intervallus diabolics, because, well, it's not important to know it doesn't fit into any of the established scales, and because it's for acoustical reasons, it's particularly screwball. Let's just leave it at that. And it's a nice image of the once very sort of solid and upright giant to it's sort of. There's something wrong, right? Well, actually, he's been changed by the Tarnhelm, so you could say the Tarnhelm, although the Tarnhelm motive is nowhere present in any of that. Okay, so in Götterdämmerung, he takes this to unbelievably great lengths because it becomes a very important motive. If we go right back to the very beginning of the Gibbetschung scene, we have this. And this whole thing, there's a lot of yum, bum, these downward scales, but downward intervals, just two notes, which is like this, but there's no particular association with it until right after the passage I played when Hagen is telling Gunther about this wonderful bride he might have who's up on top of the rock surrounded by fire, and then and says, "Can I do it? Can I go get her?" And Hagen says, "No, only someone much stronger than you can get that woman." And we hear it builds up, builds up, builds up. Just those two notes. And these two notes are going to become more and more and more and more associated with Hagen. So he kind of takes over the dragons motif, although he never has them. You'd never confuse them because the dragon always has that ba-bum, the bum-ba-bum first. And Hagen is just the two notes. Another very good lecture, very long lecture could be given on the importance of two-note descending fragments in Götterdämmerung. I was just thinking about that, and because each different interval means something else. With the scene, I have to give you a little taste of this. Sorry, when we heard the music just before the wedding, when the chorus is singing and welcoming them, and it's all these. He goes through a whole big gamut of it, and he does so in a much more sinister way. Probably the most sinister, when Brunhilde has just been betrayed. We're just getting ready. Here's Siegfried's horn. This is, to me, the worst moment in the ring. I mean, not the worst moment, the moment I find the most horrible to live. We've had all that glorious music of Siegfried going through the fire, and we're all excited, and so is she. Siegfried's come back. I'm going to throw myself in the arms of my God. And at the climax, we have. And it goes it's this big series of leaps. And then what's we can hear now? We have no idea, but we actually hear. We hear the Tarnhelm, which is interesting. And then the next thing we hear is the magic potion, which this could be actually explained naturalistically because he's being disguised by the Tarnhelm, and the reason he did it was because of the magic potion. Although the magic potion musically is just the Tarnhelm, and I'll get to that in a bit. Anyway, Hagen's this becomes really his interval, and we hear it just hundreds and hundreds of times all through Götterdämmerung, but perhaps the most tellingly would be in the music of Hagen's Watch and then at the orchestral interlude. Notice, by the way, also how poor Siegfried's horn call has gotten. You know, this so cheerful. Things are not good. If you want to, let me just play the very first passage of Hagen's Watch. Okay, so. That's the special form that I played before. All of this music is from earlier parts of the Ring, but it's all been changed. Originally it could be, but now it's all bad. The pom-pom is a distortion of, in the middle of it, I don't know how many of you heard it, we have, that's the Tarnhelm. What's the Tarnhelm doing there? There's no reason for it to be there, except that it's the overriding symbol of trickery and distortion and illusion. Then, of course, we have the new form of this, which is the new form. So all of this is sort of new forms of new and distorted, and rather in this case, horrible forms. Horrible, at least in terms of their emotion. They're wonderful musically, but they're horrible in their sort of association to taken from the past and now being distorted in Götterdämmerung. Just for completion's sake, let me point out that even this is a distortion of something else. Can anybody tell me what that is? What is that? What is the source of that? Excuse me? Exactly. And finally, this, by the way, is the one piece of motivic analysis that we have directly given by Wagner. Wagner did not get involved in this. Composers didn't in those days. They still don't like to analyze their own music. They let other people do it for them. But Wagner was so upset by the writing which concentrated on naming motives so much that he actually wrote a letter to the newspaper, the Bayreuther Blätter, which was this newspaper published sort of as a propaganda, as a publicity thing for the Bayreuth Festival, whose editor was this von Folzhagen, this friend of Cosima's, who Wagner called the degenerate idiotic monkey, actually. Wagner didn't think very much of noblemen in general, actually. Cosima, on the other hand, like her father, was always a sucker for titles. Wagner himself says maybe more attention should be spent in observing how the material transforms itself through the opera rather than trying to label every melody. And he gives us the example how becomes, and how that in turn in Götterdämmerung becomes. So this one is from Wagner himself as an example. Okay, good. Let's give one more example of an old version being transformed into a Götterdämmerung. There are lots and lots and lots. Now I'm going to give two more versions. I'll give one very, very, very simple and I think very powerful one. Anybody recognize this? Hunding, right? Heilig ist mein Herd, heilig sei dir mein Haus. You know, my hearth is holy. Your house should be holy to me. So that, in other words, that's why I'm going to let you spend the night freely in my house, even though I'm going to kill you the next morning without a weapon. Without your having a weapon. But it's sort of, overnight. Okay, let's move on to the second. I've only done the first of my categories, so I have a long ways to go. So bear with me. The first category is finished. The first category was taking old themes and transforming them into new versions in Götterdämmerung. The second is taking a character from the past and giving this character a brand new theme. And I'm going to really give you just one example because other ones would infringe too much on my my 10 questions. And you know, we, of course, first hear that when, am I still attached? Okay. Because I just sat on it. When Brunhilde, when the dawn sequence, when they're getting ready to come out of their cave. And all through Götterdämmerung, Brunhilde is very clearly associated with this theme, with this very beautiful. And we're associated with this theme with Brunhilde right through Götterdämmerung. We've never heard it before in the Ring. We've heard something very close to it before in the Ring, but we've never heard it in the Ring. But there's a very interesting thing about this motive besides the fact that we haven't heard it before in the Ring, which this one of my questions has to do with this, so I'm going to leave alone where it comes from. But there is a very interesting point. This is Big Brunhilde's main theme. But once we get to the last scene, we hear it in the Rhine Maidens use it in Act 3 when they're talking about it, when they say, it's a waste of time talking to you. We're going to go talk to a wise woman, a glorious wise woman, and we hear it very beautifully. And then, of course, we hear it very mournfully at the end of Siegfried's funeral march. And then we never hear it again. We do not hear the Stu Brunhilde theme anywhere in the immolation scene. That's an interesting point. I would just, to give you an answer for the reason for that, I think, well, there's a couple of reasons, but I think the main reason is the one we used to call Redemption, and it's actually in praise of Brunhilde, is sort of taken over as her theme by this point. No, not really. Yes, they are. Yes. Okay. You're forcing my hand, but I will address this. They're related because of something which he incorporates in both of them. Because the reason they sound related, well, they sound related for two reasons, I guess. One is that turn. The fact that this one has... and the other one has... so it has a smaller little turn. But I think that Wagner likes these turns. That's sort of one of the sort of a characteristic tick of him that goes right back to Rienzi, for a work that you obviously know I don't like a bit, and yet it does have. So you could say, well, gosh, they're almost the same. Well, very superficially they are. Or superficially, almost all melodies are almost the same. You could reduce them all. So the differences are more important than the similarities in this case. But yes, but there is another similarity which is much more significant. And it goes into what I was talking about last night, which is that falling seventh. I mean, which Brunhilde's new melody ends, is the same as... So yes, there is a similarity. I'd like to wait till tomorrow to go into where, however, this primarily comes from. Because it very, very much comes from a very important motive that we've heard all through the Ring before. So in a way, this is a new theme to an old character, but it also kind of fits into the first category because it's a new version of an old theme. But since we have a very specific new association with it, I prefer to give it its own category. Okay, I'm going to go on now to the third category, which is an old theme, which takes on, has used in new ways and takes on new meanings. Now, I've already talked about the Tarnhelm. The Tarnhelm is the main one. The Tarnhelm is, in the early parts of the Ring, a very specific motive that is used just very specifically, very contained, never combined with anything else, and just, either talking about the Tarnhelm or in Rheingold when Albrecht is putting it on to turn himself into a dragon, or then to make himself invisible first, then to turn himself into a dragon, then to turn himself into a frog, much to his own regret afterwards. And then it's heard just almost not at all in Walküre and only in Siegfried when they're talking about it. When Mime and Albrecht are talking about what's in the hoard, and then when Albrecht says he has the Tarnhelm, and we hear it a second when Siegfried's coming out of the cave. But then, of course, in Götterdämmerung it becomes enormously important. However, there is a new motive in Götterdämmerung which really is a direct outgrowth of the Tarnhelm motive, and which actually becomes, at a certain point, completely interchangeable with it. And we first hear it actually directly out of the Tarnhelm motive. And we hear it in a very interesting place, because we hear it before we can possibly have an association for it. The way the rules go, generally speaking. Usually the rule is this. The way that Wagner sets it out when he wrote opera and music is that the first time we hear a motive, we hear it in a way in which it is indelibly linked to its primary association. And although that association may change, may evolve, may develop, and new associations may get put onto it, still we always remember the first time. What's the expression? You never forget your first time. And that's the way. We always, every time we hear, we remember that first time when in the first scene of Rheingold, when the darkness starts to clear and becomes light, and we see the shimmering of the Rheingold, et cetera, et cetera. We remember, or we're supposed to remember very strongly, these first appearances. Although very often they turn out not to be really the first appearance, but there was a sort of a definitive version of these themes. And usually the purpose of it is to make clear some primary association. Since after all, the very reason to have leitmotifs is to link the music to the drama. It makes good sense. And yet here we have Gunther is just saying, why do you bother making me want this woman that I can't possibly get? And he's very angry. And it says Hagen without leaving his seat. So Hagen is playing it cool. On. So first, this is the first time we've heard the Tarnhelm in this scene, because we recognize that. And it's immediately followed by that. Now, later on, very soon later on, he's going to tell exactly what that is. He says, if Siegfried drinks this potion that I have, any woman he ever saw, he'll forget. This is not the potion at all. This is the Tarnhelm. And this is the potion. And he goes on. The point here is that Wagner is really reinforcing already from the start that one grows right out of the other. There's no reason he should be talking about the Tarnhelm here. He says that ever he saw a woman before, that ever a woman came near to him before, he will forget her completely if he drinks this potion. So it's about the potion, not about the Tarnhelm. But the potion and the Tarnhelm become completely associated with each other. And the Tarnhelm motive is this. And the Tosche motive is... And it's what... If I took the Tarnhelm motive and moved it to this key, it should be that. But instead it's... And it's sort of kind of reminiscent of what he's done with, which are dissonant chords, but good sort of healthy dissonant chords, and turn them into, which are dissonant and very pungent and painful chords. And so the magic potion music, and we associate it very clearly with the magic potion. We hear this, he's going to give her a magic potion and she'll forget any woman. And we hear it a tremendous amount when it's no longer associated with the magic potion, but we still remember the magic potion. But it's also completely associated with the Tarnhelm. So in a way, we should think of the magic potion, this very spooky, very eerie, going nowhere, very sort of without corners and things, as being just a further sort of distortion of the Tarnhelm. The Tarnhelm, which already is used to distort reality and to trick and to elude, and the magic potion sort of is a further one. So we're going back now a little bit to the talk that the magic potion is just a bit of stage trickery. In a way it is. In a way it's just a bit of 19th century stage trickery. But Wagner takes advantage of it. Of course, he would have never thought of doing this in 1850 when he wrote the text. But in 1870, when he wrote the music, he uses the stage trickery as a fantastic musical metaphor for this whole world of trickery. So the music of the magic potion, which is a condensation of the Tarnhelm, becomes a fantastic symbol musically. So in a way, it's a very, very successful. It's much more than just a stage prog, because it gives him a way to enormously enlarge and deepen the use of musical metaphor. Music which doesn't just describe the action, but comments on the action, defines the meaning of the action in a very deep sense. So I think that the magic potion, in a certain kind of way, becomes a more important element in Götterdämmerung than the potion in Tristan. Even though the one in Tristan does strengthen this link between love and death, the one in Götterdämmerung really embodies this whole world of trickery and illusion. Okay. Let's go on to one other one where you have an old theme which is transformed in Götterdämmerung. This one is really interesting because we actually see it happen before our eyes. There's a sort of a transformation really very gradually. Anybody remember what this is? Where this comes from? from Walküre and Wotan's monologue, this is a motive we hear a lot in the Ring. It comes from other things too, but it's something we very much associate. Its standard name would be Wotan's frustration, or Wotan's will frustrated. Certainly we associate it with Wotan's troubles, no question about it. That turn, and then it turns on itself. And it's also a tune that gives Wagner. One of the things Wagner needs in the score like the Ring is some of the motives are just statements on themselves, like these encapsulated statements. How can you make a constant musical score of hours and hours of music that consists of only little encapsulated statements? Of course you can't. It would be very unsatisfactory. You need things that are carriers, and this motive is a fantastic carrier because it can. Or too young. It can go on and on and on. There are whole pages full of this motive. In a way, on one level, the whole beautiful prelude of Act 3 of Siegfried is a whole big exposition of this motive. A lot of other motives too, but it's sort of the big carrier. But it's obvious that in the Waltraut narrative, this motive would come in. It's actually the very first motive we hear in the Waltraut narrative. In the narrative per se, I think it is. Because after all, what she's talking about is Wotan's problems. Yes, the Waltraut's narrative starts with this phrase. There you go. It couldn't be, that's, a clear cut. I just turned to this page. Here's a real example of motives not meaning what they should be. Do you remember, everybody knows what Valhalla. And you remember that in Wotan's monologue in Act 2 of Walküre, Wotan, in a moment of absolute self-loathing and disgust, says, I've heard that Albrecht, out of hate, has bequeathed the son. He'll be a free hero and mine isn't. I leave the world to him. It's a horrible moment. We hear this. Sort of a distortion of the Valhalla motive, a very ugly and kind of loathsome. It's a very bad moment. It's one of Wotan's really low moments. Well, here in Waltraut is describing that Wotan has just come home and he no longer has the spear. The spear is in pieces. What's that? That's the Tarnhelm again, right? So what's it doing there? Well, it's just become a metaphor for the whole messed up world. Yeah, it's really, I just can't emphasize it much. It just insinuates itself into everything. Going back now to what I was talking about before I so rudely interrupted myself. Okay, so Waltraut is going on talking about Wotan's problems, and now we hear. Okay, that's a new little element, that little jagged bit. Before it's always been, and it stops. But now it adds something sort of new. And he'll do it quite a few more times. And he'll even, so here we have this, for instance. This is actually not Waltraut. This is Brunhilde saying, I don't understand any of this stuff. What is this you're talking about? She's incapable of grasping Waltraut anymore. So he's sort of emphasized that the little jagged bit he's added to it. So now let's go forward to the horrible scene at the end of Act 1 when Brunhilde is raped by, or at least overpowered by Siegfried, and he takes the ring from her. It becomes the whole basic carrier of this scene. Where do I start? I don't want to start there. It's too hard to play. Okay. She says, Wotan, now I understand don't forget, she assumes that Wotan still has power, and that the reason this is happening is because she refused to give up the ring to Waltraut. It's one of these awful deceptions in Götterdämmerung. And we heard pa, 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 pa. So now we hear it all by itself. And this becomes an incredibly important motive in the rest of Götterdämmerung. It's almost on every page of Act 2. And I don't know what it means exactly. It means basically that now it's Brunhilde whose will is frustrated. She's sort of taken on her father's pain. But it's a new motive which is in front of our eyes, grown right out of an old one. I mean, we don't associate it with Brunhilde, with Wotan anymore at all. But I'm not entirely sure I associate it with Brunhilde either. But I associate it with Götterdämmerung and just everything going wrong. This is really one of the really bad motives in Götterdämmerung. And but again, it's a transformation of something which comes from the earlier ring. Okay, I want to get now just one more of these, and then I'll get to the hardest ones. Yeah, I still have a little time. If there's any motive in the ring which is completely unambiguous, I would say this one is. I mean, this one, the sword, or Wotan's great idea, certainly stands for some kind of unsullied heroism, sort of this, or the idea of some unsullied heroism, of some completely free and hero who can somehow forge his a love without the bounds of greed and hatred, and with sort of freedom and love. It's unambiguously good. This is a good guy motive. We hear this motive as really, the good guys, the white hat, as it were. Now, the main feature of it, I mean, but the part of the main features, if I just play that octave going down, that octave is, to me, really resonates with the sword motive. It's very, very much, it sort of has the power of the goodness of the sword and everything. So let's here, let me play for you just the very, very end of Act 1 of Götterdämmerung. Siegfried has tamed, using his word, he has basically overcome by force Brunhilde, and she's gone back to her cave, and he's going to follow her, and he takes the Tarnhelm off and announces that he's going to be honorable to his treaty with Gunther, and he's going to put the sword between them. He's not going to take advantage of the chance to make merry while the going's good, and he's not going to touch Brunhilde. But so we first thing, the end of the scene before, which has a great combination of things. There's Brunhilde, and particularly sort of woeful. That's the motive I was just talking to you about. The jagged one. And here's the new form of the woe motive. And now. There's a lot of stuff in there. I hear those octaves, I think the sword. And we hear it right afterwards. So this is clearly the sword. He's holding the sword up. He's saying, the sword is the witness to my loyalty, to my oath. But, so does this sound like happy, good-natured, glorious, heroic music? No. And the reason it doesn't, of course, is it's not followed by, but it's followed, which, of course, that's Hagen. That was the dragon, but now it's Hagen. And so by he's doing the wrong octaves. The octave is good, but these are the wrong ones. And of course, the incorporating that into it is also very interesting. That, of course, is what? What's Wotan's spear? That's one of the basic building blocks of the ring. Why is Wotan's spear here? Actually, Wotan's spear I didn't write it down as one of my examples, but Wotan's spear is a great example of old theme being used with new I did write it down. I just can't read my handwriting. It's there. Being used all over the first act of Götterdämmerung and a little bit the second act with a completely new meaning. You know, this, or, I mean, there's any number of, it doesn't really matter. All these downward scales with this very strong rhythm, all through the ring is associated with Wotan's spear, Wotan's legal power, Wotan's desire to rule the world through law, and it has many manifestations and transformations and motives that grow out of it. But here in Götterdämmerung Act 1, it's used a great deal, in a very plain, undisguised form. Here it's certainly in an undisguised form. When Siegfried and Gunther, this is kind of answering my own question for me, when Siegfried and Gunther swear blood brotherhood, at the very beginning of the scene, let's hear what we hear. What's that? What's that? Everybody, don't be cowed. You all know what this is. Everybody in this room knows what that is. It's Albert. Yeah, it's Albert's curse. It's the curse. Yeah. Okay. So not to get too fancy. So Siegfried says, "Let's drink blood brotherhood." Everybody's all happy. So the first thing we hear is the curse motive. That doesn't seem too good. And the next thing we hear is This Wotan's spear. And we hear Wotan's spear all through this when in that wonderful and very, very dark orchestral interlude between Hagen's Watch and the Waltraut scene, one of the main themes. I mean, it's Hagen, the ring, Siegfried's horn call distorted, Hagen, Siegfried. This big, loud, dire, dark music. And of course, that's the spear. And of course, we heard it several times, played just by the heaviest orchestra that Wagner can muster up. Why? Why are we hearing Wotan's spear here? What does Wotan's spear have to do with any of this? Well, it doesn't, first thing. It itself has nothing to do with any of this. Unless you buy the basic premise of how music works in Götterdämmerung, it just doesn't make any sense at all. But it makes a lot of sense. Anybody want to, why is Wotan's spear so present in, yeah, exactly. And it's making an a hideously ironic parallel. Just as Wotan got himself caught up in much to his undoing in contracts and agreements, so is Siegfried. It's not by accident that the first time we hear it in Götterdämmerung, it's precisely when they're starting to make their blood brotherhood oath. And so then it becomes more and more used kind of on its own. And when Siegfried says, the passage I played before, when at the end of the act he says he holds his sword up in sort of a mockery of the heroism of the sword, and says, you know, my sword will lie between this woman and I will hold wholly my agreement with Gunther, and we hear the spear motive ringing out. Well, it's a horrible mockery of all, you know, of both of the heroism of the sword and even, let's say, of the legality or the dream of legality of Wotan's spear. After all, Wotan made his spear presumably with very good intentions. It just all didn't work out. But I mean, and so it's very, very heavy irony, which is so characteristic of Götterdämmerung. Okay, so let's go. Now I have less time to the very last thing, and these are motives or music in Götterdämmerung, which is not the same as music in the other parts of the Ring, but which nevertheless, because of parallel situations, becomes, as it were, a proxy or a surrogate for the music. So we are forced into making relationships. There are a lot of these. I'm going to start with a couple easy ones, and then I'm going to get a hard one, a very hard one, which not everybody would agree with me, even if we're a room full of musicians or Wagner scholars, but still, I think so. Siegfried's horn call. What's that? That's the call to the Gibbetschung's wedding, right? And indeed, actually, in Act 3, when they're all hunting, we'll hear them go back and forth between each other. Well, that's sort of upside down. Sort of. So the Gibuchung's call, their horn call, the call to the wedding, is kind of Siegfried's horn call distorted. Okay, what about this? This very accurately, Simon calls it a very heavy, clumping, thumping motive. That we associate with the Gibuchungs. We hear it right away when the curtain rises near the Gibuchung Palace. This. Does that remind anybody of anything? If I play it slower and change the rhythm, it'll remind you fast. What about? What's this motive associated with? The Welsungs, right? We hear it extremely heroically in the funeral march. And actually, Wagner helps us make this connection because when Hagen is talking about who Siegfried is to Gunther and Gutrune, when he's saying this would be the perfect husband for Gutrune, and also, incidentally, the guy who could win Brunhilde for you, he quotes this motive, saying, you know, he's the Welsungenspost, the son of the Welsungs. So the Gibuchung motive is, I'm not saying it's an outgrowth of the Welsung motive, but it's sort of a thumping, weak, earthbound parallel of it. Sort of, it's a proxy, as it were. And we're forced to compare the heroism and freedom, at least as Wotan conceived of the Welsungs, with the banality and earthbound quality and vain striving of the Gibuchungs. Okay, these are easy ones. Here's a little harder one. Anybody recognize this? One of my favorite places in the ring. Anybody know where that comes from? Yes? Yes, right. Valkyrie Act 1, and it's sort of in the middle of the most ravishing part of the love duet. They're really discovering themselves. Yes, she's actually talking about how look at yourself in the look, what you look like. They're discovering actually that they look like each other, which is pretty likely since they're twins. Anyway, so this ravishing, love, sensual, wonderful. Okay. In Götterdämmerung, we have a version of this. Not exactly a version of it, but something which takes its place. And as you would expect, being Götterdämmerung, its significance is terrible. I don't want to play it the first time it comes in because that's not nearly as clear. Well, so how do these two relate? One goes, this one goes just upside down. One is just the reverse of the other. But I'm not trying to force down your throat a musical analysis. It's just that it's funny how this motive comes back in a completely different. I mean, now it seems sneaky and it's beautiful, but it's kind of awful. Partly because we know what it means. It means that Siegfried's going to be seduced. He's going to be seduced to his undoing and to Brunhilde's undoing. So it has this, and it's very beautiful. Again, I'm not saying that they're the same, but they sort of are parallels. Okay, I want to have time to talk. Am I going to go right to my big one? Yeah, okay, thank you. The big one is this. Okay, tell me, I'm going to play, this will be a little bit of a passage, okay? Okay, I'd like not just to know what that is, but exactly what's happening, please. I want really exactly what's happening. Yes? No? Valkyrie, thank you. Sigmund and Sieglinde, yes. And what's happening? No, this is before that. We hear it tons, but this is the very first time, yeah? Yes, what's happening? What's happening right then? I want really specific. Anybody can tell me what? No, this is earlier. That's long before they recognize. This is the first time the love motive comes in. That's the love motive. That's the main love motive in the ring, and this is the first time it comes in. But what's happening? I want to know exactly what's happening. She's giving him something to drink. Who said that? Who said it? First, you get top marks. Okay, you get the gold star. We go out of the room. She's giving him mead. She's given him water already, but now she gives him a cup of mead to say, drink from this cup of mead. And this is one of the absolutely most important places in the ring, musically speaking, because the main love motive of the ring is introduced in its completely definitive form. We've already heard a lot of sort of preliminary forms in Rheingold, but this is a big moment when she brings him this cup of mead, and they look at each other in the eyes. You're right. And so first thing, we have this beautiful theme, which is in two parts. The first part, that rhythm, and now a chromatic extension of it. We'll hear both of those a lot in the ring. The second one, the second chromatic part, very much associated with Sigmund and Sieglinde, very specifically associated. Okay, now I'm going to play something else. What's that? What's happening? I want the exact event. What is happening exactly as I play that music? She's handing him the potion. Yes, that's right. She comes in, bringing him a cup of potion and hands him the potion to drink. So this is an exact parallel spot to Sieglinde coming in and handing Sigmund the drink. So let's look at this theme. Now, I'm not saying for a second that this theme is the same. What my point is that it's a proxy. It's a surrogate. It also the first rhythm, ti ta di ti da pi ta pa pam, same rhythm. Also, it starts with a basically diatonic. Remember, in other words, in the key, not tense. Part, which is we hear twice, like we did the other one, and then we have a chromatic part extending. That's actually very much like. Except now it goes up. So you could see this moment as an exact parallel to the moment in Valkyrie. And this theme, in a way, is an exact parallel. I'm not saying that the Gudrun, this is usually called Gudrun's motive, but it's certainly associated with Gudruna. And it goes through incredibly, it's always amazingly beautiful and amazingly moving. I don't agree with Simon that I find Gertrude to be a pathetic but extremely touching and moving character, just weak, but very touching. Her music, I typically judge characters by their music, and if the music comes out as vulnerable and weak and makes me want to tear my hair out with its beauty and vulnerability, it's hard for me to say, she's sort of a loathsome, slimy character, because the music isn't. I mean, all the interpretation of the world can't take away what the music tells me. But there's something terribly wrong, because it's all basically deceitful. The problem with Gudrun is not that she's not a nice girl, or that she's not, but that the whole edifice with which she's working and living and dealing with is wrong. So we have the parallel between Sigmund and Sieglinde, who fall in love when she offers him a drink, and which is this wonderful, free love, which happens to be incestuous as well, but that's sort of... But still, I mean, it's this clearly a moment that we view the first act of Valkyrie as this wonderful spring, also the close relationship with love to nature and sort of the natural order is reinforced over and over and over again with this bound between spring and love. This is a love that grows out of the spring. And this other one, which is a love that grows out of magic and illusion and deceit. So this wonderful kind of parallel. And these are the ways the Götterdämmerung links so beautifully and so wonderfully with the earlier operas, and yet also makes comments upon itself because of the way in which these relate. There are lots and lots of others. Do I have time for one more? Okay. They're going to get more and more far-fetched. So that's you guys seem to swallow that one pretty easily. So. If I play that, you know, it's fire. It's all fire, right? Loga, fire. It's just this basic fire music, these slithering passages going down. Okay, in Act 2 of Götterdämmerung, in the scene between Alberich and Hagen, we hear a new theme, which will become extremely important in Act 2 and then a little bit in Act 3 of Götterdämmerung. This is the theme. You recognize it? I mean, we hear it a lot. When Brunhilde's really upset. This is if this one is really bad, this one is the worst. And usually they make up names for it and they call it like murder. Actually, it's true that Hagen is telling Alberich to murder Siegfried to get the ring, but that's, okay. But whatever name we give it, things are really bad. And it's certainly associated with plotting. We hear it a great deal in the last part of Act 2 when now Hagen, with the help of Brunhilde, is plotting the death of Siegfried. So it has this atmosphere of plotting. And we don't hear it so much this first time, but very often we hear it continues down. In other words, it's like Loga. It's very much a parallel to what Loga does. It has that same sort of chromatic slither. I don't want to get into too much into musical analysis, but it does the same kind of things that Loga does. And if you stop to think about it, Loga was also a plotter, right? Now, Loga's plotting is pretty, I don't want to say sinister, but it has, it's certainly morally questionable, and it gets Wotan into a lot of trouble. I think Loga himself is completely amoral, or if there's such a thing possible. But probably in Wagner's worldview, ultimately, it's not. It's not. He may like to think of himself as amoral, but actually he's what he does moves the world in the wrong direction. But certainly it's not anything like as sinister or just as balefully awful as this motive, which is perhaps the most baleful of all the motives. You'll hear it today. We'll hear the second act of Götterdämmerung. You'll hear it a ton, and but it's very clearly taken over Loga. It's sort of taken over Loga's plotting in Rheingold. Is now and plotting in the ring is there's kind of a lot of plotting in the ring, but plotting is a big thing which we do sort of associate with Loga, and also with Mime. But Mime uses it too, by the way. Not this motive, but uses Loga's material related to Loga. Anybody? That's from the scene with any part of the last part of Act 1 of Siegfried. It first comes in when he's starting to get excited in the question and answer scene with the Wanderer. But then all through the last scene, we that's Loga. So Mime is using it too. But somehow it never becomes quite so baleful as see, that's that same awful, ugly Götterdämmerung chord that's so dissonant and so extremely distressing. And we'll repeat it over and over like that in the second act. We'll hear this later this afternoon. So that's another taking from the earlier part of the ring and introducing basically a new motive, new material, which has enough parallel with something else that we can hear it as being sort of a surrogate, that the role that Loga played in the world of Rheingold and the role that Mime plays in the world of Siegfried now is in this horrible plot of Hagen's, which has entrapped Siegfried and then Brunhilde.